I was interested, Kyle. Like, I know you have some experience with the Laramie Tunsil deal. How much for percentage raise was that from the next closest left tackle at the time? Was that like 25%, 30%,
22%.
22%? Okay, so if you kind of extrapolate that and say to Adams, okay, you're 22% over what the guy is right now, that's like 17 and a half. So I think that would be reasonable, but I think he wants to push closer to 20. So
I guess my pushback with that is I think with Ramsey, he's the clear-cut number one corner. I'm not comfortable saying that about Adams in terms of being a safety. So I think it's kind of apples and oranges in terms of like Adams isn't the number one safety, so you can't like expect him to get that 20%, increase like a Ramsey or Tunsil did.
But Adams' camp is going to say,
the 2 first round
you guys gave up a Tunsil-sized deal, and this was the boost Tunsil got his position. So based on what you spent to get me, that's what we're going to expect you're going to pay us versus the market.
I think that with his contract though, it's going to be very hard to quantify like Jamal's full value because the number of ways in which he's used, as far as blitzing, as far as playing on the back end, playing some sub linebacker and stuff. I mean, so I think that's something that could make it a challenge in contract in terms of value.
Right. I mean, you'll probably see them. Who remembers the big debate Jimmy Graham had with whether or not he got paid tight end, tight end market money or wide receiver? And it's like his camp went to depths as far as like pulling all these in-depth kind of stats and putting these filters on his production. And like you think about what Jamal can bring as far as saying, okay, I'm an in-the-box defender. I'm a pressure player that's playing in an attack role. I'm a guy who makes plays in coverage and can play it. Like, that argument's coming. It's just going to be, where is his expectation? If the market's 15, how high above that are they going to willing to find middle ground in if Jamal's looking for between 18, 19, 20 million?
Right.
A lot to give a safety, man. I wouldn't do it if it were me, but conversation you give up for him, it's kind of like holding them hostage. I think the Rams are in a similar situation. They got held hostage.
2 first-round picks and $20 million to have Jamal Adams.
No way.
I would never have done it.
Great player, but I think that's high cotton for
a lot, man.
So, like, I don't know, where do you guys sit on, like, the value of the safety position in general, especially as it pertains to a guy like Jamal versus, like, your standard if you play him in high coverage or if he's not a guy that's a high impact? Like, he can at least check all the boxes as far as being back-end coverage, man in the slot, cover tight ends. He can play the run. It's almost like the debate that was there with George Kittle to a certain extent as far as the tight end market too, where it's like you got good receiving tight ends, you got good blocking tight ends. Kittle is the best of both worlds in both phases of that, and he got a really good size contract. So, like, Jamal's obviously not like blue chip coverage option, but he's strong in coverage. It's just not like where he hangs his hat. So, like, how do you guys work through that?
Me personally, I have always valued safeties that get you the ball back. I think the turnovers are still the most important statistics that is the determining factor in terms of wins and losses. So from a defensive back standpoint, I always place the premium value on guys who can cover and guys who can get you the ball back in terms of production. So,
anybody else?
Yeah. I mean, I think just kind of spit when I was with the Chargers with Derwin James, I got to kind of see firsthand, like, we went from a Jaleel Dye covering, tight ends to Derwin James, and that night and day difference has given me a newfound appreciation for having these kind of chess piece players who, in today's league, when it's such a matchup emphasis kind of game, you feel good about, having Jamal Adams against tight end. You feel good about, Jamal Adams being in the box, being able to bang around with some of these offensive linemen. You feel good about Jamal Adams, heck, even covering running backs out of the flat or even a slot receiver. You feel good about it. And the last thing you want is going up, on a Sunday, and you have to worry about, damn, like I don't know what Jaleel Dye is going to do against Travis Kelce today. Like we're going to be in for a long day. And I totally agree with Dre saying. I personally agree in terms of like I value safeties and defensive backs who get their hands on the balls and make plays, have that kind of ball production. But at the same time, I do think like in Jamal Adams, like specifically, I really can value all kind of his versatility and his ability and the things he can bring, to the game on Sundays. But I'm not paying him $20 million. I just can't do it. I need more turnover production if you're going to get $20 million.
Jordan, you got anything to add?
I think just piggybacking off like what Brentley said with the turnover production, I think the one thing that's staggering to me, like I did not know that Budda Baker has never recorded an interception in his career. Like I did not know that. So we're talking about like value and safeties that get the ball back. I think it's always interesting to see like the discrepancy of like the value of safeties just because you have some guys that play like all over the field. Yeah, like a Jamal Adams, he gets sacks, he covers guys, and he doesn't necessarily play in the deeper halves of the field, but he dominates in the short to intermediate areas. But then you have guys that play deep, and they're essentially your turnover machine. So I think it's always interesting to see like the discrepancy of how GMs really value these guys.
I mean, I think there's economic ways to build a safety tandem. I think committing that type of cap is hard. I think for $20 million, you could probably get two pretty good safeties for that 10-11 range. Might be a position that becomes more valuable in the draft, so that you're not shelling out big time money trying to get production out of less, players that aren't as expensive. But I mean, I'm thinking about the Bills' safety tandem of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, and that is combined like I don't even think they touch $20 million combined what they're paying for those two players. So it's not just that you have Jamal Adams. It's like what don't you have because you have Jamal Adams? We already know 2 first-round picks, but that's another starting caliber player that you're putting into Jamal, and I think that's challenging to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the draft thing, and I did an article a while back on like the safeties and how it's valued, and like besides running backs and tight ends, like it's the second least taken position in the first round. So like I just find that odd that like teams even value interior offensive line and linebacker over it. And like I look at some of the linebacker contracts, and like Zach Cunningham's a good player, but like he's making the same amount as the top safety in the league, and I'm like it's apples and oranges, but it's like interesting to see that discrepancy at positions like that. And teams have no problem taking Devin White in the top 5, but then Minka and Derwin, they have a problem with you, so I just kind of want to get your guys' thoughts on that kind of discrepancy between the two positions.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, especially when you take into account the trends across the league and how it's becoming more of a open space passing oriented league in general. But I think why you see Carter, those players that get coveted, is because at the end of the day, you can always go into a sub-package group and get another coverage option on the field. But how many linebackers do you feel comfortable with staying on the field all 3 downs and playing in coverage and playing in the run fits and being really good at it? And staying on how many linebackers do you feel comfortable playing 95% of your snaps on a defensive rate throughout the course of a 16-game season? And those kinds of guys, the Devin White, the Devin Bush, the Tremaine Edmonds, those kinds of guys, because they're on the B level of the defense and you don't have to worry about rotating them out. Whereas if you got a safety who's really good in the box, okay, we're gonna go nickel. We'll just bring another corner in instead of that guy. So I think that's I think where that discrepancy lies.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
That's how I felt about nickel corner too. Like I've never understood, like, for whatever reason, good nickel corners never go before the 4th round. And I think that's something that we could see like change here over the next few years. Like I love D'Amico Robertson coming out. Like I would have took him in the 3rd round. Like even though he's 5'8", 5'9", I just think with the cornerback position, nickel corner position, being so important. It's essentially like a starting position now just because of how much teams run 10 and 11 personnel. So that's why, like, I think the conversation with Sean Wade yesterday was so interesting just because he's only played 56 reps outside. Like, that's it. His entire, like, not career, but last year he's only played 56 reps, and most of them came against Rutgers just because Damon Arnett was hurt. So he's never had a bunch of experience outside. So I don't know, even though he's a bigger guy on the inside, I don't know how the NFL is going to value him. And I think, like, if I was a GM, I would be fine with taking, a nickel corner prior to the 4th round. But I just always found, like, just doing some research and some data, finding some data, like, about the draft, like, it's like an unwritten rule. Like, nickel corners don't go before the 4th round for whatever reason.